Okay, so we traced off the front on the fold, so pivoted or rotated on that central axis. And then we added the seam allowance, a 1/2 inch everywhere, and we put an inch on the hem, so 1/2 inch on side seams and around the top. Now we're going to do the same thing with the back. So I'll remove the front, keeping it nice and flat. And because my fabric is narrow, I'm going to have to use 2 different pieces of muslin. Okay. So here is my back. So again, I just want to make sure that it's going to fit. I don't want to use, this is my selvage, and this is where I cut it and then tore it in this direction. So I don't want to be right on the edge on the selvage because it's more tightly woven. So I want to be at least an inch or so away from there. And then I want to make sure I have space for everything else I need. So I'm going to need 1/2 inch seam allowance up at the top. So this is an inch, so I know I have plenty. And then I'm going to need 1 inch at the bottom because that's what I did on the front. So if I do that, that's almost, see, it's 1 3/4 inches. So if I put my skirt right here, that will work. So now I need to draw my horizontal balance line. So again, because I think it's easier to see on camera, I'm going to use an L square. So I want my HBL to be right about here. So let's see if that works. Nope, gotta scoot it down a little bit. Actually, let me do it to the bottom of the ruler. So again, just double check. Okay, so that's going to give me enough space to do what I need to do. So I can put my HBL line here. So I'll remove this and I'll continue with my same theme of drawing in black for my guidelines and my sew lines. Oops, shifted. So now I'll place this pattern so that the HBL is lined up with the guideline that I drew. I'm going to go ahead and draw the guideline for my skirt right here. So again, just make sure it's on there and that I have space for everything. And then I like to use rulers to hold it down. And then I also have pattern weights that I sometimes use, but sometimes the handle gets in my way. And then I also have vintage irons that I use is pattern weights and a whole bunch of other things. Okay, so just double check one more time that it's on the HBL. And then I'll just make a mark for where the hem is, because that I can do with rulers really fast once I remove the pattern. And then I'll carefully follow the contour of the pattern along the hip curve, and I either put my fingers or a ruler really close to the edge, but I want to make sure that I am following the shape of that paper. And then I'm just double checking because it looks like I drew on the paper instead of next to the paper right there. So my line didn't get transferred. There we go. That I can see. And then center back. And then transfer the dart notch. And then the little tent shape for where the dart folds, the dart excess folds towards the center back. And then the space between the darts. And then the second dart and its notch. And then the little space from the second dart up to the side waist intersection with the hip curve. Double check that that went through. Great. Now I'll transfer my dart vanishing points. I can do my drill holes too. So I have a mark right here for where the hip curve stops at the HBL, and I have a mark right here for where the hem corner is, and I have a mark right here for where the center back hem corner is and where the HBL is there. So I can use a ruler to draw those. Before I remove it, I just want to make sure I can see my punch holes and my vanishing points, which I can, and then I can go ahead and connect center back waist to HBL, and center back hem to HBL, and then across the hem. Actually, I want to give myself a little landing spot right here too. Go over at least 2 inches, maybe 3. Because we have the 1-inch seam allowance there. And same here. Go over, I have 2 inches for the seam allowance, so probably go across like 3 inches here, so that I have a place to land my skirt when I flip it. So from center back here, I need 1-inch seam allowance. for the side that I just traced off. And then I need 1 inch seam allowance for the next pattern piece. So I'm going to cut here when I cut these out. And then I need 1 inch seam allowance here. So my next pattern piece is going to start here. So this is piece number 1. And then it has 1 inch seam allowance beyond it, and that's where I'm going to cut this out. And then 1 inch seam allowance more for the other side that I'm going to trace. So I need a right and a left. I need 2 backs. And then it's going to open down the center so that I wouldn't actually put a zipper in a fit sample, but it needs to open somehow because it needs to get over the small hip space to the over the small waist, I mean, to the larger hip. Okay, so it's squared for about 1 inch back there, and then it starts to curve. Okay. Make sure I'm right on the HBL, and right on the HBL, and this is where I can use, this is an erasable ink, so I can use an iron to iron where I have that little mistake there, and then it'll disappear from where my L square shifted. So there's my 1/2 inch lower dart, or sorry, notch for my HBL. Tracing off the darts and the space in between the darts. Second dart leg, second dart space, second dart leg. The space from the dart to the side waist intersection. And then traced off the hip curve. And then side seam hem, and I can connect those with a ruler. Make sure that I have my vanishing points. And then I can go ahead and connect those dots. And then go ahead and connect these. And then I can add my seam allowance to the whole thing. Use blue because I think it's easier to see. So I have the 1/2 inch mark on my hip curve. And then right here it starts to deviate from the curve. So I pivot my ruler when it deviates from the curve, so that I can just mirror that exact shape. And then also I can go ahead and trace the darts. So my sew lines in black, my cut lines in red. and then 1/2 inch away from the waist, and I'm just following the curve. And I can draw those darts. And I like to draw the dart legs up through the seam allowance on these, so that when I cut it out, I can see the dart leg in the seam allowance. That'll make sense when I explain how to sew it. Or when you actually go to sew your own, it'll make even more sense. So again, black is where I'm going to sew, and red is where I'm going to cut. So now I'm going to do the 1/2 inch seam allowance down the side hip. And then all I have to do is draw the 1 inch seam allowance across the hem, and then I'm done. So I'm just gonna show that. So you can see the black is the actual outline of the pattern, and the red is where I'm going to cut it out. And then I have a second one. Make sure I get this notch right here. And then I have a second one on this side. Okay, so I'll show how to cut that in the next video.